Good morning once again. So we're well into our look at the book of 1 Peter. And for us today, we're going to be diving into a really touchy subject in respect to suffering and what it means to be persecuted or challenged because of your faith in Jesus. But before we get into that, I really want to say that this is all about the political side of Peter's experience with the Roman community. And it got me thinking last night about some unusual experiences that I had when I was the Baptist National Leader, and we would go with the other denominational leaders down to Parliament. Twice a year we'd meet with the Prime Minister. And on one particular occasion, probably early in my run as the National Leader, we got ushered into the Prime Minister's office, and there was John Key and Bill English as the Deputy Prime Minister. And we got to introduce ourselves to them. And I said, well, Mr. English, I said, it's nice to meet you in person, because I said, just a couple of weeks ago, I was living in a dock hut in the middle of Fiordland, and there was a poster, one of your campaign posters on the wall, and it was sitting above the bunk that I was sleeping in, so I had you watching over me. So it was a light moment. And with that, John Key, the Prime Minister, turns to Bill English and goes, he was probably using it as target practice. So that was kind of funny. But another hard case scenario happened. At home, I was preparing this outdoor bath and bought myself a cast iron bath. Okay, what's this? Where are we going with this? It didn't have any feet. And so I jumped on Trade Me and I found some nice lion claw feet to go on my bath. Yeah, with me? And they were in Wellington. And I thought, I'm going to Wellington in a month. So I ring the guy, say, I'll be by in about a month. I'll pick them up. I was going to Wellington to meet with the Prime Minister again. So I picked them up, head off to Parliament House, to the Beehive, and I look at the security guard and I say, oh, you better take these because they're just full of metal. And he goes, nah, you're right. I said, yeah, but I'm going to the Prime Minister's office. And he goes, don't worry. And so I go upstairs and I've got my briefcase and my bag with these cast iron lion's feet in there. And I'm walking around and I thought, oh, okay, I'll go and put them over by the curtain. And I'm just sitting there, we're chatting to the Prime Minister, I think, this is really weird, eh? Like only in New Zealand could you do that. There's enough metal in there to blow up half the Parliament. Anyway, I get home and sadly, these feet didn't fit, because it was just going to be a great story as I lay in my bath. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll sell them. And so I put them on Trade Me. This guy comes around, an older guy comes around, and I tell him the story. I say, these feet have been in the Prime Minister's office. And he looks at me like, oh, you're a weirdo. And that was the end of this story, But it's so funny. In Parliament, they have these little tiny lifts. I think they're designed so that you can't get an army inside one lift to take out the Prime Minister. You can get 3, maybe 4 people at a push. There's a series of them in the circular corridor area. Anyway, we were waiting as the leaders of the churches to go up to the Prime Minister's office, and this lift opens, and myself, I walk in, and in walks John Dew, who's the Cardinal of the Catholic Church, and David Moxon, who's the Archbishop of the Anglicans. And we come in, the door closes, and I'm looking at these guys, and I say, did you hear the story about the Catholic, the Anglican, and the Baptist in the lift? And they go, no. I said, neither have I haven't got that far yet. But we had a bit of a laugh, because it was just one of those strange moments when you thought, there has to be a joke here. But I couldn't think of one. Anyway. Yeah. Anyway. So back to persecution. Talking about politics. Persecution, suffering was part of the lived experience of the early church. And of course, we know it is today around the world. Still part of the lived experience of people on a daily basis. And yet Peter speaks into this, because there were folks who were persecuted into exile, persecuted into being no longer locals in their own environment, but foreigners in a foreign land. And so Peter is wanting to instruct the church as to how to behave in these environments. You are no longer the local. You are no longer the one who everybody knows, your custom and where you've come from. So Peter says this, to this you were called because Christ suffered for you. Now, I want you to just notice that. To this you were called. So this is a calling on all of us. Leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. Okay, so right from the outset, Peter is describing how those who are living in exile got to remember who they are, and they've got to Act in a way in which they are never deceitful and no lies come out of your mouth, even when you're suffering, even when you're under persecution, even when you're under pressure. It's very easy to tell lies when you're under pressure because you're wanting to defend yourself. You're wanting to make the story, let's say, a little bit more embellished. I would be hopeless, honestly, I would be hopeless as a police officer because people would tell me lies and I just go, oh, okay. You know, how come that guy's lying on the ground with a blood nose? Well, obviously you wouldn't believe it, but he came running up to me and insisted on whacking his head against my fist. And I would go, wow, really? That's a bit weird. Okay. You see, that's where I'm at. But we got to realize that when you are under pressure, lies become easier or more justified to tell. Isn't that true? Peter goes on to say, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. They're talking about Jesus here. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. Now, we could spend a long time in this passage, but what we're seeing in here is Peter's reference to the suffering servant. He's saying, you are people in exile. You are now the foreigners in this land. And you're going to find that the norms of the culture and the rules of the culture and the laws of the culture will be different to what it is that you've experienced in the past. Therefore, you are a little bit on edge. You're a little bit out of sorts with the locals. And Peter is saying, look, Jesus himself, whilst he was suffering, he didn't bring deceit to his lips and he didn't complain about that. And so we find here, even in his suffering, as we're told, an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Now, this was Peter's lived experience. Peter was in the garden when Jesus experienced this. Him and the disciples were just a stone's throw away, praying themselves, and Jesus was in this anguish. Now, that was a powerful, powerful image to be left with, wouldn't it, as you move into the rest of your life. And here is Peter, some 35 years later, describing that scene and how that now impacts his advice to the persecuted church. And so when we read this story, we find ourselves now asking ourselves, how is it that we can endure suffering? How can we endure the pressures that are subtle and yet powerful upon us? So let's go back to how it is that Peter explains this. He says, dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. So he's just talking about the normal temptations that we all face. It doesn't matter where you're living. But he goes on to say, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits. And so Peter is saying, don't give room for accusation. Live lives that are exemplary in such a way that people, even if they want to lay blame at your feet for something, don't allow them to have an excuse for that to happen. And we know that in this modern era, as it was in the earlier days, it's very easy to be accused of something, particularly when you're a foreigner or in exile. We know that as Christians, we are called to be foreigners and exiles. We are called to have a different set of values. That this is not our home. We live in New Zealand. We live on planet Earth, but our home is yet to come, our ultimate destiny. The early church was accused of being cannibals. Can you believe that? Why? Because of what we just did this morning. We were taking the communion service where we talk about the body and the blood of Christ. It doesn't take much of a twist, does it, for that to be reinterpreted 2 or 3 conversations down the road, that here these Christians are eating flesh and drinking blood. It all gets a little bit crazy sounding, but that's what happened. People were misrepresenting intentionally what Christians did. A friend of mine just about 18 months ago rang a talkback radio station. They were talking about, on the radio station, they were talking about the rate of divorce. And this friend rang up and said, I live in a very different environment. She said, I've got friends, there's about half a dozen of us, couples who have known each other for many years, and none of us have had a divorce. Now, I know divorce happens in Christian circles. But this hostess was very intrigued by that, saying, wow, That's remarkable. How is it that that has happened, that you live in this little bubble where your friends have not been divorced? And then the hostess asks, well, where did you meet all your friends? Oh, we met at youth group at a church. Oh, well, at church. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, that doesn't, oh, yeah, okay. Thank you very much for your call. Bye. Subtle, isn't it? It's subtle, but it's real. And so when we are living this life of being in exile, we would expect to be treated differently because we're not running with the crowd. The foreigners residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself. For you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. This is what God said to the Jewish community about people who come into their environment. He says, you've got to treat them as if they were born in this country. And that's a real challenge for any community because people turn up speaking foreign languages, don't they? Having different cultures, supporting the Springboks. You know, these are really big challenges. Yeah, seriously. But in the New Testament, it's the same. This doesn't change from one covenant to the next. Hebrews says, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Now, I don't know about angels, but it was about this time last year. I was down the South Island, going down the West Coast and heading off on a hunting trip. And in the middle of nowhere, we said, look, let's just stop and make a cup of tea. Pulled over into a lay-by, having a cup of tea, and there's this guy comes by on his bicycle, whizzes past, we give him a wave, he turns around, he comes back, and he says, do you mind if I eat my lunch with you? No problem. What's your name? Simon. Simon, what are you up to? Travelling around New Zealand on my bike. Great. If you ever come to Tauranga, here's my address, look us up. So anyway, 6 weeks later, I get this phone call. Hello, Simon here, I meet you on the West Coast. Yep, great, come and stay. So he pulls in his bicycle, puts all his clothes through the wash. Michaela buys a big chicken. We were heading away ourselves the next day, so it wasn't ultimately convenient for us to be there, but big chicken, and he goes off and we say, help yourself. So he gets a little bit of chicken and sits down. And I'm looking at that going, you're not going to get very far on that. Go and eat some more. Well, by the end of the night, he'd eaten the whole chicken, half a bag of roast potatoes. In the morning, I had to get away early, and I said to Michaela, make sure you give him a really good feed of bacon and eggs and sausages and toast. Well, Michaela talked to me at lunchtime after he'd driven off, and I said, how does breakfast go? She said he ate nearly half a pack of bacon and 6 sausages, 2 or 3 eggs and some toast. I was like, where was he going? She said, over the Kaimais. I said, he'll need a truck to tow him over. Honestly, but you show hospitality. Will we ever meet him again? I don't know. But maybe there's only one thing about New Zealand he remembers, and that's that they cook good sausages. I don't know. Yeah, we talked with him, we prayed, we had a good time, he knew who we were. But you do what you can, when you can, how you can, with what you've got. Peter goes on to say this, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Now, this is a time in history where it's politics, but not as we know it. Politics in New Zealand is subtle. The subtle difference between one party and another are really, well, there's some extremes, I suppose. But, you know, in New Zealand, it's sort of like, do you prefer coal or wind? Do you want your personal pronouns to be written into law? You know, things like that. Not really big by the standards of history. The standards of history in this day was such that you were either for me or you were against me. And that was all there was. When we stood together against another nation, you had to be together. It wasn't politics as we know it. So when you came and lived in a nation, it was to your advantage to live with the locals and to serve with the locals and to obey those laws and to ensure that you didn't separate yourself out and be like a group of people who were against the nation. And so these are challenges. And doing good will silence the accusation of other people. Peter says this, for it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. And he goes on to say in verse 16, Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Now, in America in the 1960s, sort of post-World War II era, there was this huge surge of confidence about what could be done. The West went through this, and we're probably still living off the vapors of that at the moment. But John F. Kennedy got up in front of the people as president, and he said, it's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's the question that needs to be asked. And this is the same spirit that Peter is talking here, is that as a foreigner, as somebody who's who's in exile, essentially, you are there to help serve the nation that you are brought to. Now, I've got a good friend in Campbell Hill. Campbell Hill runs Good Neighbour. It's a ministry that he started. It's way bigger than him. Campbell and I trained together at Baptist College 30-something years ago. But I just talked to Campbell last week. What they do is they week after week go into neighbourhoods that are really struggling. The first thing they do is they pull out the barbecue, light the barbecue, get the bacon sandwiches going, get the sausages sizzling, all the kids come in. They've got all these tools, and some of the neighbours come and grab that because they need that, chainsaws and lawn mowers and all that, and they get stuck in and they clean up the whole neighbourhood. You look, when I talk to Campbell, it's just a feast for my soul. Campbell's here going, Craig, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. But, this neighbour had never spoken to that neighbour, and they go, and this guy goes and helps this person chop down a tree or mow their lawn. He's like, it's amazing, Craig. He says all the kids are out there enjoying sausages and the old people are talking to young people. That's so good, Craig. And I'm like, Campbell, you just fill my soul with your love for the neighbourhood. And it's such a fantastic thing. And I wish I could get you all signed up for Good Neighbour right now. But this is the sort of stuff that we're talking about, where good overcomes evil. And, in that neighbourhood, do you believe in Jesus? Oh, we're not so sure. Do you believe in Campbell? Yeah, we believe in Campbell. Campbell believes in Jesus. Hey, that's how it works. That's how it works. But you see, the thing is that we live in this nation, and we live in this socialist nation, okay? And that's not a bad thing. We're very grateful to be part of it. But in that, we have this social contract, which essentially says if we pay our taxes, the government is going to serve us in return with education, health, roads, all those other things. So we know it's an imperfect system, but it's imperfect in the UK, it's imperfect in Australia, it's imperfect in Canada, it's imperfect in New Zealand. One of the challenges that's happening in the UK right now is that because of the multitude of migrants coming in, there's a whole lot of people who don't understand that you can trust people who you would never have trusted in your own country. So the reason I've got a picture of a barber pole here is because the barber shops have become a front for laundering money. And because they're all largely cash-related businesses, in Luton, an average town in the UK, in the last 7 years, there's been a 61% increase in the amount of barbershops. Why? Because they are places where money can be laundered. And it's not that I'm telling any untruth, it's an absolute known fact, and the government's not sure what to do about it. But this comes back to the fact that these folks have never been able to trust the government. And for us, we know in politics in New Zealand, it's all about trust, isn't it? If we don't or can't trust or aren't willing to trust, our nation struggles because we don't pay our taxes. And this is where we end up. So Peter is saying to us this: show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honour the emperor. Okay, but I don't like the emperor. That's not the point. Honour the emperor. You don't have to like him. You don't have to marry your daughters off to him. You just got to honour him, and that is honouring the laws of the land. Now, there's a tricky bit. There's always tricky bits, isn't there? And here we go. We move into the whole area of slaves and masters. And we know we don't have slaves and masters, okay? Well, I could get cheeky and say there are a few around, but let's try this. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. Ooh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. So if you're saying, man, I'm being treated poorly, your heart and your mind say, okay, God, what would you do here? What would Jesus do here? How would I handle this? What is my response to this? Maybe I should just endure this for a season because there's something greater to be won here. There's something more powerful to be won. You see, we live in an environment where we've been given so much privilege and so much responsibility all at the same time that when we fall into a place where we come under pressure, we feel that our throat's been cut because our rights have been taken away from us. Sometimes a boss is hard, but maybe sometimes the boss is hard because it's a hard job. It's a hard job. We also have to be very careful that we don't just assume that our rights are our rights all the time. You see, the tricky bit is when our rights get violated and we think that we're entitled. About 18 months ago, just over 18 months ago, our son Taylor was at a service station, the 11th Avenue Shell station in town, and as he was just about to pay for his petrol, the guy standing next to him crashed and collapsed, took down one of the stands, and Taylor jumped and had a look, and he was having a heart attack. His heart had stopped. So he's got military training, and so he just jumps in there and he's doing CPR and telling the guys to call the ambulance. Can I have a pillow for his head? Can you do this? Can you do that? And out of the corner of his eye, he saw this lady, and he saw her walk up to the counter and says, "Where is my coffee?" She'd paid for a coffee. And Taylor's like, seriously? Seriously? And so you just go, man, where are we at as a society when that is going on? Sadly, the person died. The medics turned up. He had pretty well died instantly. So when we talk about this, Peter is saying, how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. In other words, your rights are something that you have to be prepared to lay down. And there are times when you've got to ask that choice of yourself or of God. What am I supposed to lay down here? Because remember what we said? We started with this verse 21. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps, in his steps. Christians are not asked to tolerate abuse, but to always work diligently and honestly as unto the Lord. And this can be at times a challenge because not every boss is going to be a perfect boss. Okay, not every employer is going to be a perfect employer. But we're told, again, this time by St. Paul, that masters, you should provide your slaves with what is right and fair because you know that you also have a master in heaven. And so we've got this balance here between being an employee and an employer. And the whole idea is that we should be able to work together. Sometimes you have to make hard asks of your employees, and there are times when you have to knuckle down and do the job. But when we're talking about biblical context, we're also talking about slavery. Now, we're very grateful, aren't we, that we live in the West and we've completed this debate. But in the context of history, it was not that long ago that we completed this debate. The American Civil War, which was in 1861 to 65, was what brought about the conclusion of having slaves on your property. But it wasn't until 1965 that African Americans, or any person for that matter in America, was given the right to vote. And that's within the lifetime of many of us here. So it's a challenge for us when we look at how it is that slavery is still only within living memory. And in the day of Paul, in the day of Peter, slaves, including women and children, had no purchase or power to change their circumstances. Now, when I talk about purchase, I use that word intentionally. Purchase is often used as a rock climbing term. Okay? If you have purchase, you have something to hold on to that will pull yourself up. Slaves in the day, in Roman times, had no purchase at all. They had nothing to hold on to, nothing to pull themselves up. And out of that place and position, they were completely, not humiliated, but completely powerless to their ultimate destiny. Their lives were literally in the hands of their masters. There's a story here of suffering under persecution, and I'm going back to North Africa now. In the 2nd century, there's 2 saints called Saint Perpetua and Saint Felicity. And Perpetua was a noblewoman, and Felicity was her handmaiden. You could call it slave, but that's a little bit overstated. What happened was Perpetua was taken to a Christian meeting by Felicity, and there she was introduced to Jesus. And in that process of being introduced to Jesus, she saw and met the living God, and she was transformed. And in that transformation, she chose to serve Christ rather than serve the gods of her nation. And she was, at the time that we're talking about now, she was pregnant with a child. She gave birth to that child. And around the same time, she was taken to court and accused of apostasy. That is, not serving the foreign gods, the pagan gods of her nation. Emperor Severus had demanded that everybody make an offering to him as a god, and that entailed taking a little bit of incense and putting it on the fire in front of a statue with his image on it. That's all it would have taken. But she refused to do that. And so did Felicity, her handmaiden, who was also pregnant at the time. And so they got taken to court, and the court judged them to be apostate, to be against the nation, and they were sentenced to death. Sentenced to death in a Colosseum environment where they were going to be put to death by animals, wild animals. Well, they had to wait until this child of Felicity's was born, and at the same time, Perpetua was nursing her son. Her father comes to the jail the night before they are sent to the Colosseum, and he is in front of them behind the bars, pulling his own beard out, ripping out his own beard and throwing the hair into the jail cell, pleading with Perpetua to just recant and make that sacrifice. Make that sacrifice to the emperor, and then you will live. Life will be okay. You'll get your son back. But she refused. And so her and Felicity and some other men went into the arena that day, and they released a rabid bull, like literally with rabies, and it attacked her, but it didn't kill her. But ultimately, she was told that she had to be put to death by a sword, and the swordsman didn't know what to do. He couldn't bring himself to kill her. You see, both of these women, it was clear to the audience, the Colosseum, that they were lactating, that they were feeding babies. And this swordsman was told by Perpetua, and she took the sword and she held it against her own throat before he swung the sword. There was silence in the crowd, a silence that brought about a damning self-examination, because that crowd said, "What on earth are we doing? Here we are murdering nursing mothers for our own entertainment." And there was a shift. There was a shift from that time on when that community started asking themselves questions about what are we doing and who have we become as a civilization. I remember the date of her execution because it just happens to be my wife's birthday on the 7th of March. And this is a powerful story. And this is the worst form of story, isn't it? But even in her death, her noble death, her dignified death, her sacrificial death, she shifted the mindset of a nation. The story I want to finish on today concerns a slave. His name is Onesimus. And Onesimus is a ratbag. He has run away from his boss, his master, Philemon. And in doing so, he has now disturbed the status quo because he has run to St. Paul, and he is wanting to help, and he is helping St. Paul. So Paul has now got attention because he has got this friend of his, Philemon, who's the slave owner, but he's also got Onesimus there serving him in another town. And so what happens is Paul makes this appeal to Philemon. And it's a fascinating piece of scripture. It's just such a beautiful read. But what happens is Paul says to Philemon these words, and it's not like he's trying to manipulate the situation, but when you read how he appeals to Philemon on behalf of Onesimus, the runaway slave, you get to see a little bit of what this Christian relationship should be between a master and a slave. Paul writes, perhaps the reason he, Onesimus, was separated from you for a little while was that you might have him back forever. No longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you, both as a fellow man and as a brother in the Lord. This is a great letter, isn't it? Because why? Because Philemon had the power to kill Onesimus for running away. But here is Paul saying, hey, he could come back to you better. He could be a brother. And then Paul lays it on. And this isn't manipulative, but it's about the closest thing you're ever going to get to manipulative. Paul says this, so if you consider me a partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. If he has done you any wrong or owes you anything, charge it to me. I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will pay it back. Not to mention that you owe me your very self. I think it's an absolute beautiful piece of writing, which says, are you being manipulated, Philemon? No, I'm not being manipulated. I'll do exactly what Paul says. And so we see a reconciliation here, but the reconciliation is built around this whole understanding of brotherhood, or sisterhood as it would have been if it had been between women. But the relationship between a slave and a master was firstly one of let's be brothers together. Let's honor God together, and out of that comes our relationship and service, one to another, but jointly before the Lord. So, under pressure. We live our lives under pressure as Christians. Christians should expect pressure, know pressure, live with pressure, and learn to handle that pressure. Because why? Because you're not of this world. You're of a kingdom that is yet to be fully inherited. But we're called to live in that pressure zone. I invite the band to come out. Let's finish our time together. But let me just give you a little bit of advice, men. When we talk about pressure, we talk about struggling and strife, I just want to tell you this. No man has ever been murdered while doing the dishes. Let's stand for prayer. Lord, I want to thank you that as we read through Peter's words to his generation, that they flow to us because we too live in a world that has got pressure. And as we find ourselves marginalized or being spoken of poorly, we realize that there are those who have gone before us century after century. But Lord, we just want to pray that we can hold our head high and that we can defend our position as those who are worthy of your name because of our good actions. Not because of our arguments, not because of our fine-tuned words, but because we in ourselves and everything that we do reflect your goodness, reflect your humility, your love, and your kindness for the world around us. So let that be, we pray. And we ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.